What's up, everybody? Welcome in to a somber edition of SSPN Live. I'm wearing this shirt frontwards so that you guys can almost see Victor's first name because it's so big. I mean,
And
look
it's
at that.
backwards.
and,
Obama.
and it's backwards. That's a good point too, Ethan. But I had to wear it frontwards today, obviously in honor of the news that Victor Wembanyama was diagnosed with deep vein thrombosis in his right shoulder late last week when Ethan was on vacation. And so, yeah, I had to wear the shirt frontwards in honor of him. But it's not just news about Wemby that we got over the past week, Ethan. It was also about Coach Pop, who has been an integral part of both of our lives, really. Even though we don't know him, growing up, he was a part of our childhood. So it was sad for us to hear the news that he will be out for the year. I was thinking about that a little bit more today, Ethan, when I was at work. And for a second, I was like, maybe does that tie into Wemby being out? But then I was like, no, I don't think it has anything to do with that. I think it's probably more just with that, because if he was coming back next year, he would still want to get reps with De'Aaron and all that stuff. You know what I mean? And the rest of the team. And I'm not saying, I don't know for sure, but my gut feeling on the Pop situation there is just that we kind of had the news and the rumors that maybe he'd potentially be coming back in February. Like there were even some legit sources reporting that. So when I factor that in, and then now all of a sudden he's not returning and his future is listed as uncertain, to me, that kind of just, that's kind of telling in a sense. We don't know for sure, but with his age, with, just all that comes with being an NBA head coach, whether it's the pressure level as well as just the traveling, there's a lot of things that at some point, like, you're just going to be too old. And I don't mean that in a mean way. It's just like everybody gets to that point, you know? So maybe they ended up realizing that, but again, we'll have to wait. Maybe it's just he's out for the season and then they announce he's coming back next year. I don't think that's going to be the case, but with the Spurs, you just never know anything for certain. So those are kind of my thoughts there on Gregg Popovich and Victor being out for the season. What was your reaction and what were your thoughts on both of these pieces of news?
Well, my immediate reaction to Wemby was just like, oh man, I hope it's not something that's going to be, a recurring issue for him, like something similar to Chris Bosh, where it forced him to retire early. All reports point toward that not being the case, which is fantastic. Obviously, we don't know that much about, his condition and all that it entails. But right now, it looks like it's just going to be he's out for the rest of the year and he'll be back for game one of next season, which is honestly great. Because it puts the season into perspective. It makes it a lot more clear, Jude, I think, for the front office and for the team as far as what the goal is for the rest of the year. And to me, the goal becomes integrate De'Aaron Fox, but lose a lot of games and try and get as high of a lottery pick as possible. So there's no more gray area. There's no more, oh, we should compete or, oh, we shouldn't. It's okay. Let's just tank it for the rest of the year and try and get a high lottery pick. And so in that sense, I guess that's the only silver lining to the situation. Prayers for Wemby. Hopefully it's a quick turnaround as far as his recovery and he's not put back, in terms of his own personal timeline for growth and improvement as a basketball player. And then the Pop thing, I pretty much figured he wasn't coming back for this, to be honest, for this season. We talked about it a while ago as far as like what we thought would happen with him. And I think my prediction at that time was he'll probably come back for for one game this year. And I think that still hangs true, but for next year, I think he'll come back for like one game. And it might even just be like more of a ceremonial head coaching of one game, more so than an actual head coaching of a game. But I think we just, as a fan base, deserve one last chance to say goodbye. Not as a human being, obviously. Hopefully, he lives for a few more years, but as a head coach, somebody that's been so monumental, not only to the organization and to the city, but like you said, to us growing up, almost like a surrogate father, not father, grandfather,
right,
and life coach in a way. So hopefully he can come back for one game next year, and we can officially say goodbye and close that chapter and thank him for all that he's done for the organization. And then with Wemby and De'Aaron Fox, and hopefully a top 10 pick maybe in this upcoming draft, we can really start competing in the 25-26 season, Jude.
You know, Ethan, kind of what you wrapped everything up with there, it made me think of something. And, as much as we praise Pop, we love Pop, in our eyes, he's the best coach ever.
Right.
The GOAT, right? Um, if he does go at this time, it is kind of a fitting time. You know what I mean? Just in the sense that this really truly is kind of the step into the next era of the
Yeah.
Spurs, like next season. If this is it and he retires after this season and we have a new head coach going into next season, which I feel like that's that's probably going to happen. Again, we don't know for sure, so that's why I want to say that. But it really seems like it's going that way. Um, like I said, that's kind of it's kind of perfect timing in a sense, as much as, you never want to let Pop go and you never want anybody to have a stroke. And eventually they were going to have to go 100%.
Mhm.
Um, that's not what I meant there. But um, again, we'll just going into next season after the draft picks and everything like that, it seems like the roster is going to be very much, kind of we know the goal, like, for sure is going to be winning. Like this year the goal was winning, but it wasn't, really trying to make the playoffs. It was trying to make the play in and just get in there, get some experience and show some growth. You know what I mean? Next season it's going to be full on, like winning time again. Um, and yeah, so that's the perfect time for kind of that new era of the Spurs to be ushered in,
Mhm.
with a new head coach at the helm as well. And there were some other things that I was going to get to there, but this conversation kind of drew me more into this. And I wanted to ask you about this. I didn't have this written down pre-stream, but it just kind of came into my mind. Do you think if Gregg Popovich retires, if we've seen Gregg Popovich coach his last game and next season, like you said, we're going to have, just like we had Tony Parker and Tim Duncan and Manu's night, we'll have a night for Pop, where, and the other thing we got to remember about Pop is Pop's still going to be here. He's still going to be the president of the Spurs. So he's still going to have a front office role. So he's not completely gone. Um, Remind me where I was at. I know I was talking about Pop. I'm sorry. In
I
this
I'm
ceremony.
I'm honestly not sure.
Thank
I'm
you.
not sure where that was leading into.
Okay, I appreciate the honesty.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I know I was talking about Pop Man
Mhm.
and everything like that, but obviously, I'm losing my train of thought there. Um, this is what it was, Ethan. This was the question that I was getting to. Is Mitch Johnson the head coach next season?
Ah, I think these next 20 something games are really gonna be an audition for him. He hasn't made it an easy choice to bring him back because of the difficulty. Like when Wemby was
Yeah,
playing, we were still trying to compete and get into the playoffs, and we were losing a lot of close games. And he's obviously a young guy. I think that the rest of the season will really tell whether or not he's the guy for us to bring back. And it also depends on who's available in free agency in terms of other head coaches in the league. Because I wouldn't mind bringing in a guy
yeah,
more well seasoned with a steady hand, right? I mean, I know he's under contract, but like a Bud, if somebody like him were available or a Quinn Snyder to bring in, I think you have to make that decision because as much as I love Mitch, he hasn't shown me that he's like the next guy up, like the head coach for OKC, who's also
mhm,
very young, but like you could tell, like this guy's
yeah,
he's a savant. And then you can even say the same for Will Hardy a little bit. I know he struggled, but his team, his roster is not where it should be. But when he had a competitive team, he was obviously a very good coach as well. Um, I think it just depends on who else is available, to be honest with you.
yeah. Me personally, I will say that I think my personal opinion also lines up what I think with is what is going to happen. I totally butchered the wording there.
No, I know what you're saying.
I think that Mitch Johnson will, I mean, maybe he could go somewhere else, but I think most likely it will be somebody different than Mitch Johnson, and Mitch Johnson will just return to his assistant coach role because I think that was kind of the plan anyway.
Right.
Um, and if things would have just went, perfect, maybe if Wemby doesn't have deep vein thrombosis and everything kind of goes as to plan as what we thought would kind of happen after the De'Aaron Fox trade, and we were playing Charles Bassey, so maybe if and obviously Charles is a whole nother discussion that we'll get into later with him getting hurt last night. But maybe if he wasn't hurt, he would have been playing off the bench. And if that's
Mm.
the case, maybe the bench rotation looks a lot better, with Jeremy not having to play the backup center, which we have seen kind of in the past 3 games post All-Star break. So anyways, I say all that to say that maybe the plan was to give Mitch Johnson a legitimate look, with Coach Pop's stroke, but all of the circumstances just kind of muddied things up to where, it's not really, I guess you could say, an accurate eval, but I think there's also definitely things to criticize. But then that brings us into the conversation of the soft tank, because it's like, if he's getting told to do certain things, then he's just following orders. That's not really him. That's not his philosophy as a head coach. You know what I mean? So again, with all of that being said, because of all of just the muddiness of the Mitch Johnson tenure, I'd rather just go get somebody else that's a little bit more proven. I'd love to have Mitch back as an assistant.
I know I'm contradicting myself here when I said I wanted somebody more proven, like you said, with a steady hand. But what happened to the Manu Ginobili rumors of like he was the next man up that we were slowly grooming in the background? Like, is that still a plausible thing to think about, Jude, even though he has zero head coaching experience?
Well, I guess Tim Duncan coached a game, but he was an assistant coach for the whole season, technically. What I would say to answer your Manu point is, I know he's a coach like in the practice facility, but I just think it's unlikely.
He probably just loves his life how it is. And I
Yeah.
see some people in the comments bringing up guys like Tiago Splitter, who has been an assistant in other franchises. And, maybe he's somebody we bring in. I don't know about as a head coach. I still think, even though I just contradicted myself, I still think I'd rather have somebody with head coaching experience, Jude.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, it's hard to say you just want to go poach a coach from another team because that's just so circumstantial. But I do think that the Spurs are an attractive destination.
For sure.
One of the most attractive destinations as of right now, you could argue. So I think maybe it could be a sitting head coach somewhere else. Maybe it's somebody like Monty Williams. I know that went horribly in Phoenix, but he is somebody who lives in San Antonio and has head coaching experience and has previous experience with the Spurs. Maybe we just promote Brett Brown. I could sit here and we could talk about this all day. But I think the Spurs are just the most unpredictable thing to do here.
Yeah.
What I will say, and what I do think is going to happen, I think we will go get an established head coach. And that's what I would like us to do as well. Maybe I'm wrong on what we will do, but that's what I think we're going to do, and that's what I'd like us to do.
I would agree, but I think your first point is the most valid, which is nobody has any idea what the Spurs front office is going to do. Let's be honest.
That is a point for sure. I want to give a shout out to Cowboy Tanaka. I brought this up earlier, but he knew where I was going with it. He said you wanted to ask about the new head coach. So appreciate you, Cowboy, because that's actually like a legitimate question, after, the Pop news. So anyways, with that being said, Ethan, any final thoughts on Pop being out for the season and Wemby being out for the season?
The spotlight is now on Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, De'Aaron Fox, and all these other guys, right? People are clamoring for a trade. Now is the time to prove that you're not the guy to be moved.
It's so funny you mentioned that, Ethan, because that brings us into the next 3 games. But the way that we're going to talk about these 3 games that we missed while you were on vacation is we'll kind of just talk about some of the on-court storylines that I saw from the games, from what I could see. I was not able to watch Friday's game because despite the TV contracts being a lot better, Ethan, I was still basically blacked out of that one. It wasn't on FanDuel Sports Network, and it wasn't on the other Austin area services that I get. It was only on Ken's 5 in San Antonio. So I was not able to catch that one, but I was able to catch the other 2. And actually, surprisingly, the Spurs started off with a win in Austin against the Phoenix Suns. De'Aaron Fox had a near triple-double in this one, Ethan. And that's something that we've kind of seen from De'Aaron, minus the game last night. He's going to have to put on a performance like that in a lot of these games. But I think the bigger story in a lot of these games is that we got to see a little bit of Bismack Biyombo and Charles Bassey before he got hurt. And we were finally able to see what maybe this backup rotation looks like with a center next to it. But what are kind of your thoughts on Bismack and Charles, just from what you've seen from the box score?
I can't lie. I didn't get to watch much Bassey minutes. I did see some highlights and I did see some live play from Bismack Biyombo, and he's not obviously he's not Hall of Fame Dwight Howard. He's not Hakeem
Right.
Olajuwon, but he gets rebounds. He gets advantageous baskets underneath the rim, and he is a big body that can play physically against some of these opposing centers, and that's exactly what we wanted. He's also a fantastic screener at a. He's a lot better at just like I think oftentimes we forget to like analyze just a player's IQ,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
experience in the league. And he clearly has high level basketball IQ in the sense that he was playmaking for others and getting tip backs into other players' hands that were creating opportunities either in the fast break or in the half court, mostly from dribble handoffs. But I've been very pleased with his play. I didn't get to watch a lot of Charles Bassey, like I said, but just
Mm.
from looking at the box score prior to his injury, again, pretty much the same thing that we've always seen from Charles Bassey. He could just never get on the court, and then of course, once again, right on cue, big fella gets injured again. So
Yes. What I will say, honestly, I think my biggest takeaway, Ethan, from Bismack Biyombo and Charles Bassey, from what we got to see from them, is not just that Bismack Biyombo was able to just provide a center in the starting lineup and do all of the things that you just mentioned. And even though it was an ugly loss last night, had 10 and 10 with 4 blocks, 2 steals as well.
mm-hmm.
That's, essentially him at his best there. And even the first game, as much as it wasn't anything crazy and you only see 3 rebounds there, still 4 for 4 with 8 points, was a space eater. And, he's tipping balls, and him just fighting for rebounds in the paint, being that body, makes it easier for other guys to get boards. So definitely you could see his impact, as much as he's just a 10-day guy. And like you said, it's not like, a Hall of Fame, type of guy. It's just a rotation Bismack Biyombo, but still it's something that this Spurs team desperately needed. So I'm happy with what I've seen from him so far. But like I said, I think the biggest point for me is that Jeremy Sohan, in the minutes that I got to see him next to Charles Bassey off the bench, it just makes his life a lot easier. And even though we only really got to see that in the Detroit game, which was a loss, still, and he did play a little bit in the New Orleans game before he got hurt. If you watched those bench minutes and you just looked at the front court specifically, you could see that Jeremy was just able to play his game more. He was able to bring the ball up the floor more. It was actually easier for him to get rebounds because he's not the only one. While Charles is boxing somebody out, he can go get it instead of just getting 1v3, by the entire front court of the other team whenever we weren't playing a backup center. So anyways, I still got Bismack up on the screen here, so I'm going to try to go to Charles. But that's kind of the next thing that I wanted to talk about, Ethan, whenever it comes to him. We've really tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, but every time he plays, man, unfortunately, it just seems like there's some sort of knick-knack injury that happens after a certain amount of reps.
Yeah, I think I'm about ready to be out on Charles Bassey, Jude. How long has he been with the Spurs? Only like 2.5 years, pretty much.
Since 2022, I believe.
Okay, so this will be his third year with the Spurs, and he's been injured every single year.
Mm-hmm.
What made me really think he had a future was we gave him a guaranteed deal, right? Didn't we give him like a 3-year contract or something like that? Like it wasn't like a one and done.
Yeah, we gave him the Julian contract, which is like the second 2 years were team options. So
I
it was a
see.
4-year deal, but the last 2 years both had team options.
Kind of a prove yourself deal, right? And
Yeah.
he has shown flashes of being a real solid, just roll to the rim, get rebounds, shot blocking center, right? Just stereotypical. That's all he's gonna be. And he did show flashes of being a really good version of that. But if he can't play, if he can't be on the court,
Yeah.
then it sounds disrespectful. But we can find his skill set elsewhere that is more available.
I don't, again, we don't mean this in a disrespectful way, Ethan, but
Yeah,
I've jokingly called him Nigerian Eubanks because of the similarities in their play style. And that's the point. Eubanks is on the floor more than he is. And you
sure.
can see it here. I mean, we got his game log up here. You've got a big gap here. Well, I guess that's actually not that big of a gap, but you've got a big gap in the middle of February. There's a gap. Well, I guess actually, I think he just didn't play in
Yeah, he
between this
didn't
point.
play.
But y'all know what I'm saying. Y'all know Charles had some injuries throughout the season. And like I said, when we started really like trying to give him some rotation minutes, you see the 27 in the Miami game. He plays 7 minutes the next game, and look what happens. And that's kind of what happened here. He gets back against Detroit, and even though 11 isn't 30 minutes, he gets full rotation minutes in a game. And then the next game plays a little bit and then re-injures it. And it was left knee soreness. That was the other thing I didn't even mention, Ethan. It's the same knee. That's like, Charles, we love you. We love your play style. It's just, unfortunately, this has been something that's been going on in his career throughout it.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the 2025 free agency pool, Jude, and his name is in here, and guys making around the same amount of money as him that would be available: Jericho Sims, Alex Len,
Right.
Jackson Hayes,
Mo Bamba's still out there.
Mo Bamba, Thomas Bryant, who's kind of been on a downturn, but he's, these are just guys in a similar mold. They can give us similar things. I'm not saying they're game changing, but they'd be available. And that's kind of all you can ask for at this point from your second or third string center.
Yes. Completely agree. Obviously, the Spurs are going to address this need in the draft as well, but because we only have Victor, and like Bismack's on a 10-day contract, so who knows if he comes back next season.
Yep.
We theoretically have 2 open roster spots with Victor at center. So yeah, we don't just need the future, but we also need somebody who could come in and play next season, like you were mentioning.
Let's bring in my guy Steven Adams.
I would actually love that.
I would love that too.
That would be sad if he didn't get to coach with. Well, I mean, I would love it, but I'm thinking about the Pop comments now, like the famous Steven Adams. Where didn't he smell his hair or whatever?
I don't remember.
You got to look up this interview. I'm pretty sure like Steven Adams, this is like when he's on the Thunder, like, prime Thunder. And he's just like, yeah, Pop's hair. He's like, I love his hair or something. It's a pretty funny interview, but anyways, he had a connection with Pop. So it'd be cool to see him in a Spurs jersey, as much as it would be probably after Pop's absence. But that is kind of the front court conversation here, Ethan. So for the rest of the season, that's the other thing I was going to get to. So Bassey's hurt. We did play some Mamu Jeremy front court minutes last night. So I'd expect that to be the case, but maybe we sign another 10-day, because if Bassey's hurt and he's out, we may have a hardship, but that's not for sure either, because if he's not shut down for the season, like, I don't know if we're eligible for a hardship. But I guess what I'll say there is, if we don't sign another hardship 10-day contract big that we can play Mamu and Jeremy, because as much as that's still not that great, Ethan, Mamu and Jeremy is better than just Jeremy or just Mamu. That's my takeaway from what I saw last night. And last night was a terrible game for the Spurs, but I still could take that away.
Yeah, I would agree. If you're going to play just Jeremy at center, then you have to play Mamu at the 4. Otherwise, who are you playing at the 4? I guess KJ, and he's 5 inches shorter than Mamu. So at the very least, we got to have 2 guys out there that are roughly 6'9", 6'10", that can at least attempt to play big. Because I would hate to shove poor Keldon at the 4, because then who's playing the backup 3? I guess Julian, who's 6'9", but he's a lean guy.
Then we're getting into Malachi Blake Wesley minutes territory.
But at the same time, you know what?
Yes,
we're trying to lose, so
it's a good point there, Ethan.
I mean, if we are trying to lose and we want to get Cooper Flagg or somebody like that, then maybe we do play just Jeremy at the center with Keldon at the 4, and let Blake and Malachi try and prove themselves at that point next to Stephon or whoever else.
I don't want to say this, Ethan, but look at the screen right now. Do you see all the W's and L's?
Yeah.
I wish we could play my man Charles.
Oh yeah, no, true. He seems to be a common thread.
God bless him. But I just looked up and I see the 1 win, and I'm like, speaking of tanking. Anyways, M Easy says Derek Queen from Maryland is a good option. Connor McLeod also says that I hope we draft a big this time. I think all of us really want that to be the case.
Yes,
and we have 2 lottery picks, so just one of them, at least one of them.
Please, for the love of God.
But that goes ahead and wraps up the backcourt discussion that we have here. But there is, the front court discussion, but there is some backcourt discussion that we've got to talk about, Ethan. And unfortunately, I'm just going to go to the bad first, because as much as we believe in his potential, we love him to death. It has been a very rough stretch as of late for our guy, Devin Vassell. I do want to give him credit. I will say the Phoenix game, I watched that one from start to finish. I thought he played really well defensively in that game. And you see that on the box score with 3 steals and 1 block. But even in the game where he played really well defensively, Ethan, 5 for 14 overall shooting and 1 for 5 from 3. And that is something that has been a struggle, or has basically been the trend over the past 5 games. And even before that, you see before that, there was a little bit of some momentum that we had going. But essentially since De'Aaron has come in, it's been a struggle for Devin whenever it comes to shot making. And that is really the big appeal for Devo when it comes to what we feel like his strength is.
Yeah, he's shooting 25% from 3. You can see that on your screen in the month of February, which is basically, since we've gotten De'Aaron Fox. And that's kind of the opposite effect that we anticipated, Jude. So I don't know if there's like some unforeseen fit things between Devin and De'Aaron that, the untrained eye just didn't anticipate. But you'd think having a guy like De'Aaron who draws attention in the way that he does and attacks the paint would just open shots up for Devin Vassell. And to be honest, to me, they have. He just hasn't been able to take advantage of them. And in the last 5 games, he's playing just horrifically on the offensive end of the ball. And that's kind of where you want him to thrive is next to De'Aaron as an off guard, as a off ball mover, coming off of screens and knocking down open shots. And he's shooting, subpar from 3-point land. And I would be able to forgive that, Jude, if he was shooting 50+% from 2-point range, but he's shooting 42.8% from the field, which is just not great. So to me, the rest of this year is just up to him to prove himself.
Yeah.
To prove that these are just fluke games, that he's in a slump, and he needs to average 20 plus for the rest of the year. And that should be theoretically easy because Victor's no longer getting shots.
Yeah.
So he is unequivocally the second option. Now, will Stephon overtake him? Potentially. That's kind of what the trajectory seems to be for Stephon Castle. But just on paper, comparing age, comparing salary, comparing, potential of what they should be on paper, Devin Vassell should be the second best player on this team for the rest of the year.
Yeah, 100%. As we talked about at the All-Star break, we were kind of having our mid-year breakdown. We said, hey, we're going to wait a little bit for Devin because we felt like just the circumstances as well as the injury, like we wanted to take all of that into that account. We are at that point now.
It's gotten worse.
Exactly. I wish I had more to add to what you said, but it's just been a struggle for Devin shooting the ball. He's a tough shot maker. As much as we have seen some defensive strides this year, just as of late, the impact that I know Devin has within himself to have, I have not been seeing it. And maybe that's a fit thing, and maybe that's something that we're going to learn over time with De'Aaron Fox, that maybe it just doesn't mesh, and then we'll have to make decisions based off of that. But as TG Canoes and Kayaks said earlier, he's getting paid like $25 million now.
Yep.
And we've got De'Aaron Fox as well. And I know Wemby's out, but still, this is the trajectory. And like you said, for the rest of the season, as much as it is kind of like a tank, it's also kind of like everybody go out there and bust your ass for minutes on the team.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really where it's at for Devin. It's been a struggle as of late. We've seen the flashes this season, but we got to see it come back. I mean, I wish I had more like in-depth analysis there, but I think that's really the bottom line.
I think that's completely true. Unfortunately for Devin, we're at the point where we have Stephon Castle, who's averaging like 19 in the last 10 games or something crazy like that. So he's on the up and up. We have 2 lottery picks as well in this next draft, apparently, or we should at least. So Devin Vassell, we want you to be the 20-plus points per game guy. We want you to be the third option, right next to De'Aaron Fox and Victor Wembanyama. But if you're not going to do it, then frankly, we can find a 3-and-D guy that makes probably half your salary that can fill that hole and at least shoot 40+% from 3. Now, maybe he's not going to have the same potential or the same shot creation, But if Stephon Castle becomes who we think he's going to be, there's your
Mhm.
shot creation, there's your playmaking, there's your defense. And if we do somehow end up getting Cooper Flag and another big or whatever in this upcoming lottery, there's our two other guys that are on the up and up that could potentially be big shot makers down the stretch. So he's kind of pushing himself into the same category as Malachi Branham if he continues to play this way, which is really sad because we talked about this the same time last year, and I said Devin Vassell will be our second best player. This is before De'Aaron Fox, obviously, but he's starting to play like our fourth or fifth best player at this point.
Yeah. The worst part is the comparison. Like I hate that I see the parallels between Malachi and Devin. Like, if you would have told me this last season, I would have said you're crazy. But I see it. I hate to say it. I still think like the defense is not comparable, but there's still times, as much as I give him credit in that Phoenix games, there's still other times where
He's got bad moments.
Yeah. So for sure, I acknowledge those as well. But that really kind of is how he feels when you think about last season when we had to start Malachi at times, and it was just like, if he's not making the pull up midi or he's not making his catch and shoot jumpers, what is he really bringing to the table? That is kind of what it feels like for Devin right now in the starting lineup. It's obviously a different situation, but I think that's a very fair comparison.
I think you just give him the rest of the year to prove himself, Jude.
Yeah.
And then if he plays worse, or honestly at the same level that he's played the last few games, then you start thinking about trades.
Yeah. I think what I would say, here's what I'll say. The Spurs are going to know better than me. And that's true. We do have a lot of games left. So I do want to take the end of the season into account. Maybe this is just the fact that we drafted him and like we've kind of grown it. And him and Keldon were they came in when we started doing SSPN. So maybe like there's a little bit of a emotional attachment there. But basically the point I was going to get to is I think I would like to wait until the trade deadline next season for Devin. But also if we're getting the stat lines that we've got the past 5 games for the next 25 games, I'm not going to be mad at off-season trade conversation either.
Right. Agreed.
But you want to get to some good news, Ethan?
I do.
So the other guy that is around Devin Vassell's age that we have been following since we started doing this podcast, who has been struggling this season, is Keldon Johnson. And the past 3 games, my dude has not been struggling. He has had the exact opposite performance as Devin Vassell. And again, that's not to just crap on Devin, but genuinely, while Devin has kind of fallen off, Keldon has come out playing like he's playing for that roster spot next season and playing like he's getting paid $20 million a year as well. Obviously, the 28-point 5 assist. Basically, the 2022-esque performance against the Pistons was a 15-point loss. And last night, his 18-point performance as well was also in a blowout loss. So that really is reminiscent of 2022 in a way. Keldon has still, I watched these games, Ethan. He's playing his tail off with Victor out. And you saw he still contributed 6 for 9, 2 for 4 from 3, 15 points, 4 rebounds in that win against Phoenix as well. Averaging 20.3 points per game in the last 3 games. Obviously, consistency is the key for Keldon. We talked about that all year. But I mean, look at all of the games basically before the last 3 for Keldon.
Yeah. He definitely seems to have found a rhythm. And from what I've seen, it feels like he is playing with more patience. He's still being aggressive. He's still getting to the rim and playing with great touch, but he's also finding guys better. He's letting the game come to him better. And I know that's kind of an oversimplification of it, but it feels like for the entire year, he's been forcing it. He's been forcing it because he hasn't been able to get his shot to fall. And these past few games, he's just been, okay, I'm going to drive to the rim, but if they double team me or they come up, I'm going to drop the pass off. Or someone cuts, I'm going to get it to them, right? Or I'm going to kick it out, and I'm not going to force my shot up when it's not the opportune time to do so. And it's resulted in 3 really, really solid games for him back to back to back. But it is, like you said, consistency for Keldon Johnson. He needs to continue this for the rest of the year because, 3 games aren't going to forgive him of a year full of sin either. He's had a real difficult time playing off the bench next to these guys as well for the majority of the year.
Yeah, again, as much as we're harping on the positive here, that if we go back to what we've seen throughout the rest, these games that we see, before the All-Star break, then obviously that same discussion that we had with Devin will be the case as well. But the way, again, I don't want to be too optimistic. It's just 3 games, knock on wood. But when I watched that Phoenix game, that first game coming out of the All-Star break, just the way he came out with the energy he had off the bench, you could tell he was really motivated. Like, regardless of whatever the future holds for Keldon Johnson, you could tell coming out of the All-Star break, he's like, not just, okay, Wemby's not here, so we all got to have a better impact, but they're paying me $20 million, man. Like, I need to be the 6-man energy guy.
Mm-hmm.
He was controlled, but he was still like TG Canoes and Kayak said, he was very aggressive. It's like a controlled aggressiveness. It's hard to explain. It's like you said, he's still using his strengths, like driving to the rim, but he's not taking, a contested shot if he doesn't need to. He's making that extra pass. And you've kind of seen that with the 5 assists in the Detroit game as well. But a lot of hockey assists for Keldon as well, but really just a lot of flow and a lot of connectedness in traffic, where maybe where Keldon slowed down this season, where he's just kind of been standing on the side of the wing, taking catch and shoot jumpers and hasn't been very efficient. Definitely, he just seemed so much more like himself out there. Like that nickname, the Mustang, I've really seen that in the last 3 games. Anyways, I'll end it with Keldon there, but hope he can continue this. Hope this was a turning point for him.
Agreed. Nothing to add.
All righty. I talked about Jeremy as well. That was really the only other thing that I had written down. It was mainly just the front court and then Keldon and Devin. So like I said with Jeremy, I think that Jeremy playing next to a backup center makes his life a lot easier, whether he's in, well, that would be in the backup lineup. But even when he's in the starting lineup, when he plays next to Victor, we saw what that looked like at the beginning of the season. So unfortunately, with Charles being hurt, he'll be back to the same scenario he was in, which I guess helps the tank. But yeah, that was going to be my other main thing, was that Jeremy was looking a lot better when he plays the 4, but now he's not playing that anymore again.
I feel like we've done this every year. Jeremy looks better when he plays his position. Who would have thought? But I guess the only silver lining is that, like, now he has experience at center, right? So he has experience at every position except for his natural position. So when we finally decide to, have a competent big and like play him at his appropriate position in the starting lineup, he'll probably be a hell of a lot better.
Yeah. I completely agree. Robert Ball has been in the comments talking about us, asking us to mention Devin's field goal percentage. And of course, he gets in here after Ethan already mentioned it. So rewind, Robert. We talked about Devin. I swear, I even responded to you in the comments about that. Just came in a little bit late, but we did talk about him. We're just wrapping that up. And M_DLG says we will sign Naz Reid.
I'm down.
I would love to sign Naz Reid. That would be a dream for me, because he's an LSU guy and he's a goated meme.
I love a skinny-legged big, so let's get him on the team.
And he can shoot.
He can shoot. Yep. Please, just anybody over 6'10" that could get more than 4 rebounds a game.
That's 240 pounds.
I'll take him.
Well, that is all for us today. We appreciate you guys coming in and hanging out with us. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to hit that like and that subscribe button below. If you want to stay updated with the show, follow us on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, at SSPN on YT, at Jude McLaren, and at Ethan_Quintero. We appreciate